Here's the most aggressive way to counter the Ruy Lopez opening, which also has the highest win rate for black. If you already love the Rousseau Gambit against the Italian game, then this is its Spanish cousin. It is even more sound and therefore more dangerous. I'm Grandmaster Igor Smirnov, and let me walk you through this exciting opening. Now here, after f5, you're hitting this pawn on e4, and you immediately turn it upside down. They were hoping for a slow positional game, which they was hoping for with the Ruy Lopez opening, but you turn it into a much more tactical battle. Now they will usually either take this pawn on f5, which is a mistake, or they'll take here, continuing their Ruy Lopez idea, or finally they might settle for just defending their central pawn by playing pawn to d3, and we're gonna discuss all of that. So first off, what if they try to continue their idea of the Ruy Lopez and they just trade on c6 and then they grab this undefended pawn on e5? For a second it feels like your position is just bad. You blunder this pawn, looks like your king is exposed, etc. However, there is this great move that actually gives you a really great position. This is a double attack to this knight, and if the knight simply comes back, then you can grab this pawn on e4 with a check to his king, which is quite annoying for white, and after that, basically white becomes a defender. Also notice that once they traded on c6, your bishop is now active along this diagonal, which is also cool. So if they retreat back, no problem, you take this pawn and check their king. If they want to be more aggressive, then lots of your opponents will play queen h5, because it looks like a win-in shot. And of course you can cover, and now their both pieces are attacked, but they were relying on this tactic. And in similar positions, it is often a winning tactic for white, but not this time. Here you just recapture. And it is funny that even 2000 rated players repeatedly played this blunder queen takes h8, just because again, in similar positions, it is usually how white wins. But in this case, this is how they lose, because, you know, of your queen on d4, not on d8, and therefore you can just go ahead and grab this queen. It looks like you both are playing some weird variation of Fischer random. Now, of course, your opponent doesn't have to blunder his queen. He can take this pawn with a check to your king, and therefore you move the king away. Now, let's comprehend what happened. First off, you're up a piece, and yes, it looks dangerous because your king is exposed, but in reality, it is totally safe because your opponent is totally passive. They only have one queen in the game, while you have a ton of pieces around your king, basically almost all of the pieces, and you greatly outnumber white. They have no chances for any attack. In fact, their own king is also in danger because you threaten still this check, and even if they castle kingside, their king is going to be along this open h-file, which also makes it very easy for you to attack. Now, very often they'll play d3, both to guard this pawn and also to enable this check because they're still hoping for some sort of attack. Now you can play knight e7. I'm showing you one variation which is just fantastic, and you don't have to memorize it. I mean, your position is already winning. You gain tempos attacking this queen, you attack this pawn, you have an open file for this rook, everything's cool, right? I'll just show you one thing that can happen, but it's also just very amazing. So here they can go bishop g5, pinning this knight, continuing their idea. But this pawn on b2 is no longer defending. You can grab it and then grab the rook, so you'll win even more material. But your opponent is still optimistic. He goes bishop f6, hoping to attack the queen, x-ray the rook, also attack this rook on h8, and they're finally relying on this pin on your knight. But you have a pin-tastic refutation. Queen takes a1. Basically, you want to distract the bishop from this pin, because if the bishop captures your queen, you can capture theirs, but along the way you end up with a ton of extra material. Now, if white doesn't want that, then they have to do something else. Notice that this knight is now also hanging, so they may castle, hoping that, okay, I'm down material, but at least, you know, white is hoping for their counterattack. But now you have really the next level humiliation. The move with all the seriousness is suggested by Stockfish as the top choice of black, and it's the move queen e5. What? And I think it's suggested literally just to humiliate your opponent more. Because now you threaten queen takes h2 checkmate, thanks to your rook, and if white captures it, then after knight takes g6, you simply end up in this endgame with the purest form of two bishops advantage. One of the most common reactions of your opponent would be to take this supposedly free pawn, and just as it was run in the Rousseau Gambit, it is run here for the same reason. Now you're able to push this pawn forward and drive away their knight. At this point they start thinking where to move the knight, and they realize that there are no good squares, because your queen takes away these two squares, and your knight takes away these two squares in the middle of the board. Therefore, if they wish to move the knight, they have to move it all the way back to g1, where it started, a very passive position, just wasting time. Now, very often they will try to trade on c6 so that later they can move the knight to a better square. But the downside of this trade is that now your bishop is active and it's ready to get back this pawn on f5. So once the knight moves, you get back the pawn, and now you have a very nice active position. This knight on e5 is somewhat loose. If you think about it, you can attack it this way or this way. It's a little bit far away from the rest of white's pieces. And again, you just have a great position. Knight f6, castle, life's good. It's interesting that at this point, quite many of white players played queen h5. And I was quite surprised because it's a pretty advanced tactical idea, but somehow they find it. It's impressive. Anyways, white's idea here is that after you cover by g6, they can sacrifice the knight right here. And now there are two potential variations. If you take it by the pawn, it's bad because you lose the rook on h8. But if you take it by the bishop, then there is queen e5, which is a double attack. And for the moment, it looks like they outsmarted you. But not for long, because after you move the king and they happily grab the rook, then you lock the door and capture their queen. There's another interesting try. If white is seduced by your pawn and then allow this central push, now they're encountering this problem. Some of them might play queen e2, pinning your pawn and also attacking it by their queen. But the solution is pretty simple. You just play a symmetric move queen e7, unpinning the pawn and defending it. Therefore, the threat of pawn captures the knight is real, and they'll have to drop the knight back anyways. But now you also have this new idea with the knight coming forward with a multiple attack of everything in his position. Queen c4 is the only way to try to hold on, but now queen e5 is a great move with a double attack of the bishop. And even though technically you're playing a gambit, I always recommend sacrificing your opponent's pieces. Some of you guys play the Rousseau Gambit and you asked me to record a similar gambit against the Ruy Lopez, and I know that you might be wondering about this move, knight to d4, which sacrifices a knight, however, enables the queen to come forward and attack your king. So the question is whether it's dangerous for black or not, and whether you should accept this knight sacrifice or not. And the answer is absolutely, because now there is a big difference with the Rousseau Gambit. In the Italian game, white has their bishop right here on c4, and from there the bishop supports the queen coming to f7 check. But now this move is unavailable, you're going to simply capture it for nothing. Therefore, here, this gambit makes no sense for white, even though some of your opponents will indeed try it out. But now they just gave up a piece for nothing. Moreover, this bishop is now hanging. So as this pawn on c2, and from there the king and rook. So the bishop will probably come back, still desperately hoping for this check. But now it's your turn, you shut it down with a d5, gaining one more tempo for your development. The bishop needs to go, then you keep gaining tempos, hitting the queen. Queen h4 here is the most common move, knight takes f5. Let's not forget that we're up a piece and you keep attacking. For queen f4, there are different ways to go about this. g5 is the most energetic, you just keep gaining more and more tempos, hitting the queen. And on the next turn, the queen is suddenly trapped. If you want to know how to find and calculate such variations easily on your own, I've got a free masterclass about that. You can check it out by clicking the link below the video. It's also very common for white to simply defend the central pawn by playing pawn d3. Then you trade in the middle and play knight f6, developing your knight and attacking this pawn once again after they defend it with their knight, which is actually an inaccuracy because it allows this bishop b4 pin, and you keep putting pressure. Now this knight is pinned, knight takes e4 is still a threat. They might wish to castle kingside, but if they do something else, your plan, generally speaking, will remain to be the same. Now there is no pin any longer, and therefore I recommend that you simply take this knight, because if not, the knight can jump forward to d5 and put pressure. It's easier to trade it off, plus now they have all these weaknesses. The pawn on e4 is still hanging, and basically whenever I get to this position, I always know that I have great chances of winning this game, because they have, again, a bunch of weaknesses right here, and you have a very clear attacking plan. So white will do whatever. Let's say right now they're probably going to be wondering about this threat, and they'll play something like bishop g5 to pin your knight, and then you castle. Now in most cases they play h3 to prevent you from playing a similar pin, and then you can play something like queen e8, and specific moves don't really matter. You can play something else, but fundamentally you wish to reroute your queen to the kingside. Along the way you also stepped away from this pin, therefore the knight is now free to go. They may play something like rook e1 to guard this pawn, and then queen g6. This is what you wanted. You have this file for your rook. Now you also brought the queen to the kingside. You also have your bishop eyeing there, and all these things together combined give you a very strong attack. And white doesn't have any clear counter plan or anything to do at all. Like basically this queen is always annoying. If the bishop ever comes away, there's always this bishop takes h3 tactics, exploiting the pin, and you win the game. Now it also feels annoying because maybe knight takes e4 or this pressure, so they'll usually trade off, but now you also have this clear pressure from your rook. So also bishop takes h3 is coming because of the pin. So if they go king h2, let's say, to step away from, this opposition along the g file, you just continue your development, bring the other rook into play. Now you have this massive pressure. The knight is pinned, it can't ever go because then rook takes f2. If they do whatever, let's say rook f1 to guard this pawn, I mean, it's easy to see that you have too many pieces eyeing towards his kingside. And sooner or later, you're going to break open the position and go for the kill. For example, right here, you can already sacrifice the rook and then the bishop to totally expose the king. And then after a couple checks, you finish the game off in style and white is defenseless. So after whatever, rook h6 mate. And if you want to study my favorite aggressive opening for white, check out this video, especially if you're below 1500, it's gonna demolish all of your opponents.